Nearly 2 months on from the announcement that Marty Cifuentes had been placed on gardening leave, QPR has finally announced his successor, with former Rennes manager Julien Stéphan the next to take to the helm at Loftus Road. So, who is the Frenchman, what is his coaching history, and most importantly, what type of football can we expect him to get Rangers playing next season? I'm Connor, aka Hoopsa. I talk all things QPR, and in this deep dive I'm going to be answering all of those questions and more, so let's get into it. Julien Stéphan was born on the 18th of September 1980 in Rennes, France, and with that being where his father and current France national team assistant coach Guy Stephan was playing professional football himself at the time, it's safe to say that the sport was in Julien's blood from day one. Following in his father's footsteps, Julien's own playing career began aged 7. As a youngster, he spent time in the youth academies of Olympique Lyon, Bordeaux and PSG, graduating from the latter as a defensive midfielder in 1998 before spending a total of 3 years in PSG's B team. In the summer of 2001, having been released by PSG, Stéphan signed his first professional contract with Toulouse in France's 3rd division, and was even called up later to play for France's under-21s that same year at the Mediterranean Games in Tunisia. But after making just 4 appearances for Toulouse, he would move on at the end of the season. That ended up being a bit of a theme throughout his playing career. Short stints followed at RC Paris, Stade Briochin and Jouer in the lower tiers of French football until he eventually called time on his playing career in 2008 aged 27. Evidently though, this was a moment and decision that Stéphan had been preparing for. While at Stade Briochin a few years prior to his retirement, he had completed a sports management degree in his spare time, and after hanging up his playing boots, he embarked on his coaching journey, once again aping the path his father Guy had tread himself, having transitioned from playing to coaching aged 29 after a car accident. The earlier years of Julien's new career were spent coaching various youth teams at his hometown club of Rennes, first with the under-19s between 2012 and 2015, and later Rennes B between 2015 and 2018. And across those 6 years, he quickly developed a reputation for nurturing young talent and implementing a modern, structured playing style in his teams. Eventually, he impressed Rennes so much with his work with the reserves that when Sabri Lamouchi was sacked as head coach in December 2018, the club appointed Stéphan as interim head coach, and after winning his first 2 league matches in charge against Lyon and Dijon, he was rewarded with the gig on a permanent basis. His first half a season as a head coach really couldn't have gone much better. The day after Rennes announced him as permanent head coach, he led his team to a 2-0 Europa League win over Astana, qualifying Rennes for their first ever European knockout round, a round they would go on to win with a 6-4 victory over Real Betis on aggregate. Despite a tough draw in the round of 16 in the shape of Arsenal, the dream would continue in the first leg with a 3-1 home win, but Rennes would eventually be knocked out with a 3-0 loss at the Emirates, ending their European hopes for the time being. Remarkably though, just because they were out of the Europa League didn't mean they were going to end that season without any silverware at all. Stéphan made a good impact in France's top flight with a 39% win rate over his 23 league games in charge, lifting Rennes from 14th and just 4 points above the relegation zone at the time of his appointment to 10th and 18 points clear of the drop by the end of the season. But it was an excellent run in the Coupe de France, the French equivalent of the FA Cup, that would deliver Rennes' first major trophy since 1971. In charge for all 6 rounds, Stéphan's Rennes dispatched Brest, Saint-Privé Saint-Hilaire, Lille, Orleans and Lyon to book a place in the final against PSG, a match in which they would overcome a 2-0 deficit at half-time to force extra time and penalties before winning the shootout 6-5. The giant killing of PSG, who had won this cup for the past 4 years and hadn't lost a cup final since 2011, was significant enough in isolation. But paired with the fact that Rennes had developed a reputation as perennial losers, having twice lost in the final in that same competition in 2014 and 2009, Stéphan had taken the club into dreamland in just 6 months. That meant Rennes secured their 2nd successive Europa League qualification, and while Stéphan's side finished bottom of Group E with 4 points in the following 19-20 season, 15 wins from 28 in League One and an impressive 53% win rate saw the club sitting in 3rd by the time of the season's controversial early conclusion in March due to the pandemic, earning Rennes their first ever Champions League qualification as a result. Many neutrals complained about their fortunate positioning, but having been in the top 4 for 17 of 28 rounds and the past 12 in a row before the season's conclusion, there was plenty to suggest they would have stayed the course over a full campaign. When football resumed in 2020-21 though, after a very strong first 18 months in charge, Stéphan endured his toughest season as a head coach to date. Rennes started well in the league and were once again in the European qualification places come Christmas time, but on the 1st of March, having finished bottom of Group E in the Champions League with a single point, won just once in 2021, and on a run of 7 without a win in all competitions and 4 straight defeats, Stephan resigned from his first head coach role. He wasn't out of work for long though, because just 4 months later, fellow League One side Strasbourg appointed Stephan as their new manager for the 2021-22 season, and despite the way things had ended at Rennes, it was a move that surprised many. That's because, having been a yo-yo club over the past 20 years, even going bankrupt in 2011 and having to work their way back up to the top flight from the French 5th tier, Strasbourg had typically finished mid to lower table since their return to League One in 2017, finishing 15th the season before Stephan's arrival. And although things hadn't ended how he would have liked at Rennes, getting them to the round of 16 in the Europa League, winning the Coupe de France and qualifying for the Champions League was more than enough to justify him looking for a job higher than the bottom half of the table. Amazingly, despite his resources being much more limited at Strasbourg, Stephan once again had a considerable impact in his first season in charge, guiding his new side to a remarkable 6th place finish in League One, their highest since 1980. They would have qualified for Europe too had Nantes not won the Coupe de France. Considering their lack of spend and transfer activity and the fact that the same crop of players had finished 15th the season before, this incredible turnaround was almost entirely down to Stephan's tactical overhaul, but we'll get into that more shortly. Unfortunately, things didn't stay rosy for him for too long at Strasbourg. Despite surprisingly retaining most of the core of his squad and a couple more million euros spent in the summer transfer window, the side very quickly reverted to its lower table ways the following season, and in January 2023, with just 1 win from 17 league matches and the very real threat of relegation looming, Stephan was sacked. Now, Strasbourg fans are clearly very much used to the ups and downs of football, but this drastic U-turn had come as a surprise given their progress the season before. There were a myriad of reasons, from an unlucky injury record and new arrivals lacking match fitness, to the loss of both his starting left and right wing-backs in the summer window who had been essential in his system the season before, to a reluctance to change his tactical setup despite a dire lack of wins. But having gone into the new year with just 1 victory under their belt, the board felt they had no choice but to pull the trigger. So, for the first time since 2018, Stephan headed into 23-24 without a job, but in November 2023, another surprise twist in his Rennes story unfolded. Rennes had enjoyed 2 successful seasons following his departure in 2021, twice finishing 4th in League One and once again competing in Europe. But after Stephan's successor Bruno Genesio picked up just 2 wins from his first 12 in 23-24, he agreed to leave by mutual consent, and President Nicolas Holvek turned to a familiar face to pick up the pieces. It's safe to say though that Stephan's second stint as Rennes head coach didn't quite reach anywhere near the dizzying heights of his first. It was once again a surprise appointment given how things had ended at Strasbourg and the fact that Rennes had pushed on under Genesio. And while the side definitely benefited from a new manager bounce, going on a 6-game winning streak after his first 4 matches in charge, they petered out in the spring and finished 10th, missing out on European qualification for the first time in 7 years. Come the following season, Stephan would only end up making it 10 games in before he was sacked in November 2024. Rennes had responded to a disappointing 23-24 with an ambitious summer transfer window. 16 players departed, bringing in over 130 million euros, while 11 joined for around 80 million. Like many French clubs, they placed a real emphasis that summer in making youth a priority. It's a policy that had served Rennes well over the past 6 years, with all of Jeremy Doku, Eduardo Camavinga, Ousmane Dembele and Enzo Lefebvre cutting their teeth at the club at a young age. The problem is, last season Rennes seemed to overinvest in that department, and it was evident on the pitch. There was a distinct lack of experience in a team that had become used to the top end of the table and playing European football, and even the more seasoned players in the side lacked clear roles or positions. Stephan's inability to find some cohesion from the club's drastic squad overhaul led to inconsistent tactics and a constant chopping and changing of personnel, and this was ultimately his downfall. He just couldn't get his new team settled, and after just 11 points from 10 games, he was relieved of his duties once more. And that now takes us up to the present, where after 8 months without a job, Julien Stéphan is set to start his next chapter as head coach at Queen's Park Rangers, his first ever job in English football. So, before we get into mine and your own thoughts, the question is, based on the football he's had Rennes and Strasbourg and Rennes again playing in the past, what kind of tactical setup can we expect him to deploy at QPR next season? Well, there's been a lot of noise about 3-5-2 and wing-backs, and while that's certainly a system he used to initial success at Strasbourg, having also used 4-4-2, 3-4-3, 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 and 4-1-4-1 during his coaching career so far, Stephan's defining characteristic is his tactical versatility. Now, that's not at all to say that QPR might not end up using a 3-5-2 next season, though given our squad in its current guise, I don't see that being overly likely right now. But the point is, he isn't a dogmatic Amorim type manager who comes in with one setup and shoehorns that in regardless of personnel. Stephan has switched it up wherever he's been, sometimes multiple times at the same club, evidently to varying levels of success, and very often depending on the opposition his side were facing. His changeable nature may be because at 44 he's still very much in the infancy of his head coaching career, and still figuring out what works best for him. But evidently he does have a pragmatic approach, and he likes to adapt depending on the personnel available and the requirements of any given match. There are some consistencies between Stephan's teams though. He tends to favour structured, possession-based football with a compact midfield in an attempt to dominate the centre of the pitch, which is why those advancing fullbacks or wingbacks have been important to his teams in the past. He also likes his sides to have flexibility in their pressing, with a mid-block or situational press favoured unless a match requires a particularly defensive approach. Looking at the various different shapes he's used, during his first season at Rennes he mainly favoured a 4-4-2 or sometimes 4-2-3-1, with the latter shifting into a 4-4-1-1 if the opponent warranted a more defensive approach. It was his favoured 4-4-2 that won Rennes the coup de France against PSG, with a low block helping to limit the damage of that initial 2-0 deficit and pave the way for the comeback. Before long though, he started to try to freshen things up. In 2019-20 he experimented with the 3-5-2 he would later bring in at Strasbourg, but he soon reverted back to 4-4-2 after a short string of losses, and Rennes shot up to third. It was that season that a 16-year-old Camavinga, who Stephan had given his professional debut to in April 2019, became a mainstay in this side, and he is one of many young talents that the Frenchman has promoted and nurtured, leaning on the skills he developed as a youth academy coach. In his final season during his first spell with Rennes, Stephan mixed things up once more with a 4-3-3 or 4-1-4-1, making that compact midfield even more vital and trying to bring more fluidity to the team's attack. Loan signing Steven Zonzi was particularly essential for this, with the majority of Rennes passing and slow build-up going through him as the 6. At struggling Strasbourg, Stephan once again showcased his adaptability. Dealt an almost identical squad to the one that had finished 15th the season before, he transformed former manager Thierry Laurie's 4-1-4-1 direct long ball football into a progressive 3-5-2 with that same emphasis on possession and a compact central midfield. What's interesting is they tended to play very differently depending on whether they were home or away. At home they would press high and keep the ball, while on the road they tended to attack much more directly, press less, and defend deeper. It's also intriguing that despite the focus on possession, Strasbourg remained explosive in transition. Wingbacks Leonard and Gilbert were very important to Strasbourg's attack in that regard, utilising overloads and cross-field switches to open up space in behind, and the pair racked up 13 attacking returns between them as a result. Stephan's tactical evolution of Laurie's side was a great success in that campaign, leading to a shock 6th place finish in 21-22, but come 22-23 he was forced to evolve that style of play again, and this time I don't think he had much of a choice. Despite retaining the core of the previous season's side, both of his starting wingbacks departed in the summer of 2022, and with a number of injuries to his side, he was without his first choice back three. That meant eventually he switched to various formations with a back four, but with a constantly changing starting 11, he was unable to halt his side's dismal form. His second stint at Rennes had a similar tone, with a chopping and changing between 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, and occasionally a 3-4-3. But recurring injuries and that vast squad turnover last summer meant nothing quite stuck for him the second time round. So how could these tactics translate to QPR next season? Given his flexibility, we really can't rule out anything, but for me personally, I think it's much more likely to initially be an evolution of the 4-2-3-1 we've seen over the past 18 months than him ripping up the squad to force in a 3-5-2 from the get-go, and I think that's down to a few things. Firstly, right now, we just don't have enough centre-backs to play free at the back and still have adequate cover. That could be rectified in the transfer window, but QPR have evidently started moving towards a model over the past year and a half in which CEO and director of football Christian Nori oversees the signings, not the manager. For Rangers to throw that out of the window immediately to suit Stephan would completely defeat the object of that whole setup, which is to avoid players being signed to suit a specific coach and then being rendered useless if the next one doesn't fancy them. The bigger reason I think we'll see something close to a 4-2-3-1 though is that in Nori's one and only external media interview with BBC Radio London last September, he explained that analysis of the most successful championship football played over the last decade had led the club to want to play some form of 4-3-3 possession-based mid-block high-press football. And outside of Stephan's 3-5-2 Strasbourg, that's essentially exactly what the Frenchman's various formations have been a version of, and most likely a major factor in why he's been appointed. Cifuentes almost never deviated from the 4-2-3-1, so I just don't think we'll see Rangers stray too far from it in the early days of Stephan's tenure, but there could be some interesting variations. He may want to switch to a 4-1-4-1 or 4-3-3 with someone like Varane playing a similar role in the 6 to Steven Zonzi at Rennes, and Field and another playing slightly ahead. Equally, our newly re-signed Jimmy Dunn will likely be of great appeal as an attacking fullback, and that gives him the chance to shift into something like a 3-4-3 mid-game. The thing that I think will be most interesting next season though is how he implements his possession-based game. That's a characteristic that was a big part of Cifuentes' philosophy, but rarely did it come to fruition how he'd envisioned. It often led to long periods of backwards and sideways passing, and most of our successful spells of last season came when that was abandoned in favour of a more pragmatic approach. Stephan did show at Strasbourg that he can blend the slow build with explosive transitions, and I think that will be crucial in his early days to excite the fan base and keep people on board. Right, lastly then, what do you think and what do I think? For me, it's really no great surprise that we've gone for another European coach. This was always going to be someone young and progressive to fit in with Nori's vision and the system he wants Rangers to play. I am quite surprised it's Julien Stéphan though. Given the hype he amassed in his early days off the back of a very successful first 18 months at Rennes, I am shocked to see him come to QPR. This is a coach that has brought through future Real Madrid and Man City stars, one that won the French FA Cup in his first 6 months and dispatched a Neymar and Mbappe padded PSG, and one that has managed games in multiple top European competitions. Now, it would be hard to argue that his career has curtailed in the past 2 years, and he has got things wrong too. One win in 17 at Strasbourg, after all, is about as QPR as it gets. But still, to move from France's top flight to England's second tier, to a club as balmy as Queen's Park Rangers no less, doesn't feel like something that he'd already had mapped out on his ideal career path. On that basis, I can't help but draw comparisons to his fellow Frenchman Regis Lebris, and I'm sure that's a case study he'll have looked at as inspiration to get him on track to the Premier League. But if he thinks he has quite the same chances of promotion in his first season in charge, I fear he may have been grossly missold. Obviously, there's no denying the appeal of managing in England, but off the back of 2 failures in his past 2 jobs, this does feel like a huge gamble for his career. Because if things go wrong for him here, I have no idea what that next job would look like for him. Let's look at the positives though. I like that he's known for his nurturing of young talent, something that Regis Lebris was too. QPR are very clearly focusing on promoting youth and bringing in young gems to polish up, and that in my opinion is exactly how this club starts to progress. That can only happen if the coach is willing to use them though, which Stephan very clearly is. I also like how much experience he's had in France's top division and multiple European competitions, and despite the fact it's not always worked out and he's sometimes tinkered too much, I like his tactical flexibility too. For all of his positives, something I found frustrating about Cifuentes is it rarely felt like we adapted how we played to nullify our opponent. That's the side of the game Stephan seems to be extremely on top of, and I don't think it should be underestimated in how many more points that can help you pick up across a season. So what about the question marks then? Well, there is the fact that he's never managed in England before, and I'm fully aware that's something that every fan says when bringing in a foreign coach. Obviously it can work, and if you're a good manager, you're a good manager. But again, going back to Cifuentes, although he eventually got a real tune out of his squad in his first season at the club, it never really felt like he was willing to adapt his game to something that would suit and flourish in a league as tough as the Championship over the long term. Clearly, Stephan is a much more adaptable manager, and this may help him get going quicker, but it's a horrible league to be in if you don't hit the ground running. Cifuentes had the benefit of joining and eventually saving an already sinking ship, but the expectations are very different this time round. With that said, all of Bill, Critchley and Ainsworth had experience of English football before joining the R's, and I don't need to go over how that went down again. Another doubt for me is that all 3 of Stephan's stints as head coach so far have eventually been riddled with the same issue. He starts well, but over time, when he hits the roadblocks, he's rarely, if ever, found the necessary solutions to overcome them. Now, it is worth saying at this point that had he managed to resolve those issues or hadn't encountered them in the first place, there is no chance he would have ever ended up at QPR. It's like saying, why doesn't Paul Smith score 15 goals a season, or why isn't Jake Clark-Salter available every single game? If they were those players, they wouldn't be ours. But given Rangers normally serve up a fair share of their own roadblocks over the course of any given season, the Frenchman is going to need to be ready to improvise when necessary without throwing too many options about at the same time. When I hear and read how much he chopped and changed personnel and formation when it went wrong at Strasbourg and Rennes, I think back to last season's injury crisis and our own horrendous start, and it makes me wonder how much worse that would have been if Cifuentes had been switching from 4-2-3-1 to 4-3-3 to 3-5-2 in pursuit of a solution. He did change the approach to our play, but the core setup remained the same, and that eventually allowed him to dig himself out of the hole that had been dug. Should Stephan find himself in a similar scenario next season, he'll need to act decisively and with conviction. Regardless of the positives or negatives, we're at the most exciting point of any new QPR head coach's tenure right now, and that's the one when a ball hasn't even been kicked. The possibilities are endless, and we have no idea what's beyond the horizon, whether we'll be daring to dream at the top of the table or languishing at the bottom for yet another season, whether Stephan will be a future legend or just another name on a long list of strugglers that have passed through W12. Either way, he will have my full backing come August, and right now I can't wait to see how this team shapes up next season. Anyway, that's enough from me. What do you think about Julien Stéphan's appointment? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, so please do let me know. If you've enjoyed this deep dive and you're not already subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate it if you could do so. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Cheers!